Hi, my name is Doug Laney and I am an amateur smoker. I like to smoke foods for myself, my family, others. And I'm going to tell you a little bit today about the process of smoking cheese, how I got into it, a little bit of the history of smoking, and take a look at the smokehouse that I've designed, and we're going to talk about traditional smokehouse design and my smokehouse design and how they're a little bit different. And then we're going to go through the whole process of smoking cheeses, and you'll get to see how easy it is and fun for the whole family, all that sort of good stuff. Okay, we're going to talk about the difference between smoking, barbecuing, and grilling. Those three words tend to be used interchangeably, but they have distinct meanings. Smoking is a low temperature process, and the temperature is defined by what meat or product that you are cooking. If you raise its temperature above the point at which the fats inside of it melt and start to render, you are starting to cook that product. So we want to stay below that temperature, because if we are smoking cheeses and it all melts, it's not going to be a very good product. So we're going to keep it below the melting point of all the fats in the cheeses that we're going to be smoking. And you can do this with different meats as well. You can smoke pork, beef, turkey, poultry, any of those products. And the point at which you switch from smoking to barbecuing is once you cross the threshold that the fats inside that product start to melt and render down, you are now barbecuing instead of smoking. So a lot of times people will talk about smoking a pork butt or a brisket, where they make pulled pork or sliced brisket or something like that. And it is true that you are using smoke as a predominant flavoring, but because you are raising it above the temperature at which the fats melt, you are actually cooking that product, and that is called barbecuing. That's a long, slow process. It takes 10 to 12 hours. And beyond that is whenever you cook it very quickly over high temperatures, and that's grilling. You know, most people are very clear on the distinction between grilling and barbecuing, but the distinction between smoking and barbecuing is where we get lost a little bit. So when you are doing traditional smoking, you want to keep things cold so you don't cook them. And the traditional smokehouse design would look similar to this one. It's basically a vertical cabinet where you can hang foods whenever you're cooking them. And we'll do a quick introduction here. In this case, I have a couple of racks inside, so that use dowel rods to separate them, so I can set shelves on here and set things on it, or I can move the dowels up higher in the cabinet and tie things off and hang them, like if I wanted to do bacon or some other smoked meats or something like that. So a traditional smokehouse would be a vertical cabinet like this that would be well ventilated. And the idea traditionally is, if you're going to do cold smoke, you have to get the fire away from the smokehouse, because if you build a fire inside of here, it'll get too hot, you'll start to render the fats, and you'll be barbecuing instead of smoking. So traditionally what would be done is a smokehouse like this would be built on a hill, very similar to the one that this one's on now. And what would happen is that they would dig a trench from the smokehouse down the hill, and then they would put a piece of pipe or tile or something to cover that trench, and then they would build the fire at the bottom. And just like it would basically turn this whole trench and smokehouse into a chimney for that fire. And by separating it by a large distance, 10 to 12 feet would be a pretty common occurrence, you would actually give all of those combustion products time to cool off before it got into your smokehouse. So what would be entering the smokehouse would be cold combustion products, cold smoking, and that was what they would use to preserve the meats. It acts as a preservative because it tends to the smoking, the smoke byproducts are very acidic, and they tend to lower the pH. Bacteria have certain pH ranges at which they are most comfortable. And if you get them outside of that range, they will actually stop growing, and that's one of the ways that you can use for preservation. So another very important factor for preserving is you have to extract moisture. You can think of beef jerky as an example. If we take enough moisture out, there's not enough moisture left in the product. It's high in fat, low in moisture, so bacteria can't really survive. So that would be a traditional smokehouse, where we would have a fire pit far away from the smoker, a trench up to the smokehouse to give the smoke products time to cool, and then a big chimney coming out the top. The trouble with that sort of design is that you have to tend to fire. If you get the fire too hot, burning too quickly, you have two problems. One, your combustion products will burn completely and you won't end up with a very aromatic smell. If you're burning very hot, the only thing that you get are oxide products like carbon dioxide and ash as a result. And really what you want is some incomplete combustion products. Those are the very aromatic things that you smell whenever a fire first gets going, that first whiff of wood smoke. That's what's in that. And that's what we actually want in here. So one of the problems is that if you get a fire going too hot, it'll burn too clean and you won't get any good smoke flavors. So when you're making like a traditional pit fire, it's kind of difficult to get all of those things. And that's why you'll run into things where people will suggest smoking wood chips in water and all of that sort of stuff so that it will not burn completely or they won't burn too hot. Another problem that you can have is if you get your fire going too hot, then your smokehouse can overheat and your products inside can melt, and that would be bad. The flip side is if it's too cold, if you don't get your fire burning hot enough, you won't get a good draft. So the way that the smokehouse would work is you'd have a fire at the bottom, and the chimney effect would naturally pull the smoke products from the fire through the trench up to the smokehouse and out the top. If you don't get your fire hot enough, you won't get enough draft. There won't be any smoke in there to help keep all of the products together. So to change the way that worked, instead of using a separate fire pit, I end up using wood pellets that are made from flavorful woods. I have a couple of different varieties like hickory and apple and oak. Depending on what sort of flavor that we're out to achieve, we'll use a different wood product to get that. And by using these wood pellets, I can cook them very... I have a stainless steel product that holds them all together, and I can light one end and it'll slowly smolder and trail through this zigzag pattern, so that I can have a very dependable source of smoke. It won't burn too hot because it's not very closely packed together. It can't actually get into a big flame. So we'll have just an hour long or several hour long generation of smoke, and then we can put it right in the smokehouse. It's not very big, so it doesn't overheat. It just smolders enough to make a lot of smoky byproducts and flavors to get all of the flavors in the food that we're trying to smoke. And that is to note that this is for smoking only. If I were trying to actually barbecue where I needed heat to cook something, the particular product that I use would not be sufficient for that. So the thing that we're going to be doing today is smoking cheeses. They're a great simple product. You don't have to worry so much about food safety. There's not a lot of bacteria and things like that get involved with cheeses, so they're pretty safe. You can do this at home pretty easily. And we're going to go through the whole smoking process, show you the cheeses, show you how we set up the smokehouse, and get everything running that way. Thanks. Okay, at this point, we're back out to the smokehouse. So we're just going to open it up. I'm going to turn the fans off first. And we'll open it up and see. Actually, not as smoky as it should be because we lit on fire again. That's okay. We do have to check on the process occasionally when we load in the cheese, make sure everything's working right. That's why we get started before we put the cheeses in. And there we go. Smoke flavors will surround the cheese. We'll close everything back up. Turn the fans back on. And we will briefly monitor the cheeses. Take a peek every 30 minutes or so for the next few hours. I like to smoke for about 4 to 5 hours using my particular setup here. And then we will come and check in a couple hours when everything's all done. Had to get the dog in there, didn't you? So we'll come back and check on the cheeses in 4 to 5 hours, make sure everything's all done. They should pick up a light darkening color from the different smokes, and we should be able to see that contrasted against the cheeses where they're laying up against the grates. Those spots where the cheese is actually touching the grate should keep its natural color. Thanks. So these are the tools that we're going to use to generate the smoke. I have hickory pellets here. We were talking about these before. Rather than starting with whole wood, just start with the pellets, and they fit in this stainless steel device here. It basically looks like a maze. There was a fellow in Minnesota, I believe, who developed this thing as a product for cold smoke generation. We basically pack the pellets in this little maze, and then we'll light it with the torch. And once we get one end lit, we'll actually just blow the thing out. And what will happen is that the flames will end up smoldering down this maze. And it's been sized. He went through several iterations on the design of this thing, but it's been sized so that it'll burn through about 1 linear inch per hour of smoking. So I can decide how much smoke I want by how much I pack in here. And we're going to smoke these. These cheeses for about 4 to 5 hours. So I'm going to pack it in to right around the corner here. And then we'll load it up, light it with the torch, and blow it out. And you'll be able to see how, because it has incomplete combustion, we get a lot of aromatic products out, and those are the flavorful, tasty things that we want in our food. Okay, so once we have this thing all packed in, we're just going to light it with a torch. It's got a hole in the end just for this process, so we're going to, you'll notice as it starts, you can see a lot of smoke coming off. It's because we have incomplete combustion going on. We're just going to use the torch to get everything nice and hot. You can see that as it gets hotter, we end up with less smoke and more flames developing. And you'll notice that as the flames develop, the smoke goes away. That's because we have more and more of those combustion products burning. It's a cleaner combustion. It doesn't smell as much, not as aromatic anymore. And basically we're just using the torch at this point to give ourselves a nice hot start, to generate a little bed of coals that will keep a flame going, so when we blow this thing out, it'll continue to smolder down the entire length. To prevent any of the coals or anything from catching the rest of the smokehouse on fire, have it sitting on a concrete board. Take the torch away, let it continue to burn, make sure that we've got a nice hot start on it. You'll notice at this point we still have a very well-developed, clean flame. Not a whole lot of smoke. And just a little bit more pellets of this thing. I want to make sure these guys get smoked up good. And now, when we think that this is well-developed and ready to start smoking, we'll literally blow the flame out, and you can see all the smoke being generated now. That incomplete combustion like that is where all of the strong flavors come from. We'll put that into the smokehouse, we'll close it up, And in my case I use fans for ventilation, and we'll turn the fans on. And that will be, pardon. It provides fresh air for combustion and recirculates the smoke products around, so the smokehouse will be completely engulfed in smoke. And we'll go get the cheeses ready and bring them out here, and at that point the thing will be fully loaded with smoke. We'll put it in there and drop them in for a couple hours and let them absorb the great smoky flavors. So we're here. It's about 4 hours later, 4.5 hours later. It's a little after dark, so we had to get out the lights. The smoker is just about finished up. If you come in closely real briefly, you can see that the smoker has the little smoke generator here in the bottom is just about burned all the way through. It's still just barely smoldering down at the last little bit. The last ends there, the rest of it's all ashes. If you tap it real heavy, those things just fall away and disintegrate. So we're right down there at the last little bit. And you can start to see that the cheeses have been in here and smoking for a few hours, and we'll look at them a little closer inside. But they picked up a little color, and if you can smell them, you can smell that the wood smoke smell clings to them real tightly. So we'll take these inside and we will get ready to package them and clean them up and get them stored so that they'll have time to rest. Okay. We're back inside here, and we brought the cheeses inside, as you can see them here. Hopefully you will be able to contrast the color a little bit from earlier. But as we were talking about before, it's where it's a little hard to see on some of these cheeses, but we'll take a look-see. You can see where the cheeses have been touching the rails, well, they'll maintain their natural color. You can see how this one got a little warm and actually melted into the rails a bit. The lighter colored cheeses here will probably show it a little bit better. You can see some white coloration in there. They pick up a little bit of color from the rails too. But they've darkened slightly. It's pretty cold out right now, so they're not going to darken up too much. But you can see how they change color a little bit that way. They've picked up the smokiness. Whenever you buy smoked cheese in the store and it's all very dark brown, that's a wash, a synthetic coloring to just make it look better. So at this point, the cheese has absorbed some of the smoky flavor, but it's mostly concentrated in the outside skin of the cheese. If we were to try to eat a piece of this cheese right now, it would taste like burnt wood on the outside and cheese in the middle, and that's not really a good combination. What we need to do is wrap this stuff back up and let it sit for a week to 2 weeks minimum, although you can age it longer than that, and that smoky flavor will start to diffuse through the cheese, and you'll eventually end up with a very tasty food product that's all blended with a nice smoky flavor. You can use Ziploc bags, but if you're actually going to be packaging this stuff for a little bit longer than that, you want to use something that's airtight. And in our case, we use Food Saver, and we will demonstrate how that process works right after this. So the traditional method of saving cheeses, storing cheeses, is that you would tie them up in sackcloth and hang them up, let them dry. They would either form a very hard crust on the outside and be protected that way, or the other alternative is that they would mold up. Either way, what would happen is you would cut that exterior portion off and you would just eat the interior, which is still fine and preserved. I don't like to waste cheese like that because we don't buy the giant pieces and that sort of stuff. So we actually use the Food Saver bags to seal them up. It works better than using Ziploc bags because if you put your cheese in a Ziploc bag, you end up sealing it up in a high humidity environment. What I'm doing is buying the bag material in rolls. You literally cut a piece off, use this machine to seal up one end. It basically just melts the sides of the bags together. And then it's very easy to just take the cheeses that you've already selected and put them into the bag. And then you will use the machine to vacuum out all of the excess air and then it will melt and seal the bag. By taking away all the oxygen, it will help preserve the cheeses longer. By pumping out all the air, it removes all the excess moisture, so it's much less likely to seal up. And then at this point, all we'll do is mark the kind of cheeses that we have, write down the type of cheese, put the date on it, and we'll keep it and preserve it for as long as we want, because in this sort of vacuum sealed configuration, it will keep months. We've got some examples that we can show that are over a year old at this point, and they're sealed up and in good condition, whereas I've tried to take some out of these bags and put them in Ziploc bags, and it will mold up in weeks. So at that point, you have smoked cheeses that are preserved and ready to store in the fridge for months at a time until they develop a strong aged flavor. And you have cheeses that are preserved. Not exactly the old-fashioned way, but preserved nonetheless.